Hey everyone, I have picked up a couple of chapter 18 questions that we can go over right now. Take a look at question number 10 here. Is telling us the full employment output is QF and is asking us about cost push inflation. So whenever it is cost push, it means the aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left. So the answer is D, a leftward shift of the aggregate supply from AS2 to AS3. Question number 11, this and 12, these two are similar questions. This D is the aggregate demand curve. This curve B is the short run aggregate supply curve, and A is the long run aggregate supply curve. Okay. Now over here is asking us about demand pull inflation. So the demand pull inflation, this works like that. So we have this aggregate supply curve. Kind of to show this using a graph like this one. So demand pull is gonna be when the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. Okay, this is the aggregate supply curve, long run, and aggregate demand curve shifting to the right here. We move from the full employment equilibrium point D to point C here. But this point C, this is a short run equilibrium. Over the long run, this is followed by aggregate supply curve shifting to the left. So when you have demand pull, it's called demand pull because this is initiated with an increase in aggregate demand curve to the right, and then we reach a short run equilibrium, and then to reach the long run equilibrium, the aggregate supply curve has to shift to the left. Okay. All right, next question. We did this question already about cost push inflation. This is the aggregate supply curve shifting from AS1 to AS2, or aggregate supply curve shifting to the left. Okay, let's take a look at question number 8. Growth of production capacity means the production possibility frontier shifts outward and the potential gross domestic product increasing, or long run aggregate supply curve shifting to the right. Okay. So this one is a short run Phillips curve that shows an inverse relation between rate of inflation and unemployment rate. When inflation increases, unemployment decreases, and vice versa. And just to point out something else here, short run Phillips curve slopes down, and this one is the long run Phillips curve. This is a vertical straight line, and according to the long run Phillips curve, there is no relation between the rate of inflation and the unemployment rate. Okay. Alrighty, let's see what's going on here. So PC1 and PC2, these two are the short run Phillips curves, and PCLR, this is the long run Phillips curve. So initially the economy is operating at point C, where expected and actual inflation rate are equal to 4%. So something to point out here, whenever the long run Phillips curve is intersecting the short run Phillips curve, the actual inflation rate is equal to the expected inflation rate. And each short run Phillips curve is associated with some expected inflation rate. So PC1 is associated with expected inflation rate 4%. PC2 is associated with expected inflation rate, which is 6%. And on the vertical axis, basically we are calculating the actual inflation rates. All right, the question here, the economy is operating at point C where expected and actual are 4%, makes sense. If actual inflation rate increases from 4% to 6%, what happens? So it's gonna be this one. The economy moves from point C to point D and eventually moves to point A. Okay, that's gonna be C. All right, let's look at the next question. So this one, we have a long run Phillips curve and two short run Phillips curves. So point B on the short run Phillips curve represents what? All right, let me tell you something else here. The unemployment rate associated with the long run Phillips curve, this one is called the natural rate of unemployment. So point B, this one's related with another unemployment rate. Let's say this is 6%, or the natural rate of unemployment is 6%, and the unemployment associated with point B is 4%. 4% is less than 6%, so the unemployment is below the natural rate. Okay. This one, remember, this one is a Laffer curve. Alrighty, what else to look at? Okay, we have two Phillips curves here. Say this one's 4%, this one's 6%. Alright, the expected inflation rate is 4% for PC1 and 6% for PC2. Question, the move of the economy from point C to E is explained by what? Okay, we are moving from point C to point E. So another thing to understand is every point on the short run Phillips curve, the expected inflation rate is basically the same. So point E, the expected inflation rate is equal to 6% because this is on Phillips curve PC2 where the inflation rate is 6%. But the actual inflation rate, which we read from the vertical axis, is less than 6%. But at point E, the actual inflation rate is equal to, reading off is 3%. So my answer here is going to be A. Actual inflation rate less than expected inflation rate. Okay. Right, I believe we have another question to look at. Okay, point B. Again, when you look at these questions, just try to figure out which Phillips curve is point B at. Because point B is on Phillips curve PC1, the expected inflation rate on point B is equal to 4%. But if you read from the vertical axis here, the actual inflation rate on point B is equal to 6%. So point B is explained by actual inflation rate that is greater than expected inflation rate. Okay, that's all from this chapter.